Hello everyone, welcome back to my fourth lecture on Tintin in Tibet. I am Arindam Ghosh, as I have already introduced myself. I am an assistant professor in a college located in Birbhum. In my previous three lectures, I have first introduced with you regarding the conception of popular literature, the definition and scope of popular literature, how popular literature is different from artistic piece of literature or high literature, the basic difference between a bestseller and a classic. I also talked about what is popular culture or pop culture, what is the cultural implications of popular culture, and how popular culture is emerging as a very important field of studies in the cultural studies field. I have given you some of the examples of the popular culture. I have also discussed with you regarding the basic definition of comics and how comics differentiates itself with graphic novel, how the genre of the comics become a very important genre after the First World War and specifically after the 1950s, after the Second World War, how comics like Batman, Spider-Man and Superman, these superhero comics emerged after 1938, 1940, and how Tintin, the famous comic album, changed the paradigm of the graphic novel or comic scenario. I also discussed with you about how various other serious writings of the genre like Persepolis, which is actually basically about the predicament of an Iranian woman, more serious graphic novels like Mouse, Art Spiegelman's Mouse, which is a graphic narrative about the Holocaust. It's a survival scale. I've also discussed regarding other graphic narratives like Alan Moore's V for Vendetta and other narratives. Then I have discussed about Tintin and how Tintin emerged as a very important graphic narrative, how Tintin can be treated as a multi-layered text, how Tintin can be treated as a text that unravels the contemporary politics. It reveals the slave trading in Arab. It talks about the Cold War, about the space race, Balkan politics, and of course about the political insurgencies in the Far East, how it critiques the capitalism in America, how it talks about the racism and animal killings. It actually rather supports the animal cruelty and racism in Tintin in Congo, and how a politics of representation occurs in Tintin in the land of the Soviets, and how Tintin in the land of the Soviets actually expostulates the author's fascist and at the same time anti-Bolshevik, fascist and anti-Bolshevik political lineage. So Tintin not only emerges as an adolescent narrative, but rather it becomes a very important comic tool of satirizing about the social and political events of the contemporary times. Tintin is a text that has been published from 1929 down to 1975-79, and various important human rights issues like, for example, slave trading, bloodless revolution. All these things have been discussed in Tintin. Now let us begin our discussion on the characters of this comic album. In this particular lecture, I'll discuss about the origin point of Tintin, how the character of the Tintin emerged, and about the other characters, other very important characters in Tintin, about Captain Haddock, Professor Cuthbert Calculus, and others. Then I'll move into the textual introductory elements in Tintin in Tibet. So now let us begin with the image of Tintin. Now, talking about the image in Tintin, you can see Tintin bolte amader mathar moddhe ki ashe. Tintin bolte amader mathar moddhe an adolescent young journalist who is 18 or 19 years old, 16 to 17 years old, many critics said. Tar kotha mathaye ashe ekta নীল রঙের সোয়েটার and brown colored pants a young, intelligent man with a brief puff in his hair. এই image আমাদের মাথার মধ্যে টিনটিন বলতে আসে. So Tintin means a round-faced young man running with a white fox terrier by his side. A fox terrier means the dog, Snowy, and is easily one of the most recognizable visual icons of the 20th century. Truly, Tintin is one of the recognizable visual icons of the 20th century. And Hergé created Tintin as an ethnically white Belgian who was a native of the Brussels. Brussels is the capital city of Belgium, aged only 14 to 15 years old, with blonde hair, and the critic Assaulin deemed Tintin to be middle class, which he considered one of the few traits that the character had in common with the Hergé, the creator of Tintin. Now in his first appearance, Tintin is basically dressed in a long traveling coat and hat. A few pages later, adopting his familiar plus force and check suit, black socks and Eton collar. So this is the I would say this is a basic costume introduction regarding the costume of Tintin. So this is the basic costume line through which Hergé introduced Tintin. And Hergé remembers a Canadian student at his college who was teased for wearing plus force, and Argyle socks certainly an inspiration. So this is Palais Halt during his trip around the world in 1928 almost subtly influenced Hergé to create Tintin, many people said. So at first, the famous quiff means the hair, is plastered to Tintin's forehead, but during a particularly vigorous car chase, his quiff is out and remains so. By the time he arrives in Chicago for his third adventure, both Hergé and his readers feel they know Tintin well, and he was to change little in either appearance or dress. So Hergé was once asked by interviewer Numa Sadal that how the character of the Tintin developed, and he said, and I quote, "He practically did not evolve. The character of the Tintin do not evolve or evolutionize. খুব বেশি পরিবর্তন হয়নি চরিত্রের মধ্যে. Graphically, he remained basically an outline. As I'm saying that the graphics of Georges Remy is basically clear drawing style. There is a clear line, and this view was echoed by Assaulin, who commented that graphically Tintin was as uncomplicated as the storyline. So remember, Tintin's storyline is very uncomplicated. It is very much predictable, but at the same time, it is very attractive. In spite of being predictable, it attracts us. তাও আমাদেরকে সবসময় টানে predictable হওয়া সত্ত্বেও. Talking about one of the most popular characters in Tintin is Captain Haddock. You can surely draw an image of Captain Haddock through these visual representations. Captain Archibald Haddock, he is a merchant marine sea captain and Tintin's best friend, of course. He was first introduced in The Crab with the Golden Claws, and Haddock is initially depicted as a weak and alcoholic character dependent on the other, but later evolves to become genuinely heroic and even a socialite after he finds a treasure from his ancestor Sir Francis Haddock, Chevalier Francois Haddock in the original version. So this particular text where Captain Haddock will find treasure for his ancestor in Ray Rackham's treasure in the famous comics book. From that book onwards, Captain Haddock transformed a lot, changed a lot, and he acquired the Merlin Spike Hall, and Tintin of course actually helped him in this comic book to gain and regain those treasures of his ancestor. So Captain's course in humanity and sarcasm act as a counterpoint to Tintin's often implausible heroism. As we will find it in the Tintin in Tibet, that when Tintin will say that he will eventually find Chang from a crashed site, from a site of plane crashed in the Gosenthem Massif in Himalaya, Captain will say that it's an implausible job. It will not be a practical work to do so. A voice of plausibility, voice of non-heroic practicality, এইটা সবসময় ক্যাপ্টেন টিনটিনের মাথার মধ্যে ইনজেক্ট করার চেষ্টা করেছে। প্রথম দিকে ক্যাপ্টেন একটা অন্য ক্যারেক্টার ছিল, যে খুব বেশি পরিমাণে ইনটক্সিকেটেড অবস্থা থাকতো, মাতাল থাকতো, কিন্তু পরবর্তীকালে ক্যাপ্টেন একটা ইম্পর্টেন্ট ফিগার হিসেবে টিনটিনে ইমার্জ করে, এবং সেটা টিনটিনের দৌলতেই টিনটিনও ভয়ঙ্কর পরিমাণে ক্যাপ্টেনকে নানাভাবে সাহায্য করেছিল। So he is always quick with a dry comment whenever the boy reporter seems too idealistic. The hot-tempered Haddock uses a range of colorful insults and coarse curses to express his feelings. Curses like billions of blue blistering barnacles. এটা বাংলায় বলা হয় হাজার হাজার জ্বালা ধরানো ফোসকা, নীরেন্দ্রনাথ চক্রবর্তীর অনুবাদে। Or 10,000 thundering typhoons, হাজার হাজার 10,000 বজ্রবিদ্যুৎ সহ টাইফুন। সো এইরকম ভাবে ক্যাপ্টেন হ্যাডক এই গল্পের একটা কনস্ট্যান্ট সোর্স অফ হিউমার। And Captain Archibald Haddock, he is basically a merchant marine sea captain and Tintin's best friend. This particular sign, anchorage, is actually is an icon that bears captain's identity. The captain ki proman korche se captain. This is a famous graphic designing where the famous from the comic album of Tintin, where captain's alcohol is being transformed into a giant circular ball due to a lack of the gravitational force. This has occurred also in Destination Moon. যাকে বাংলায় বলি আমরা চাঁদের ভর নেই, তাই অ্যালকোহল বা মদ একটা গোলাকার পিণ্ডতে রূপান্তরিত হয়েছে। So Haddock is initially depicted as a weak and alcoholic character, as I have already said, under the control of his treacherous first mate of the captain, mate of the ship, Alan, who keeps him drunk and runs in his freighter. But later he regains his command and his dignity, even rising to the president of the Society of the Sober Sailors. In the Shooting Star, we have already seen this. But he never gives up his love for rum and whiskey, and especially Loch Lomond, until the final Tintin adventure, Tintin and the Picaros, when Professor Calculus cures him of his taste for alcohol. So in the final narrative of Tintin and the Picaros, Professor Calculus will eventually cure him about his taste of the alcohol. Now in the adventure, Secret of the Unicorn, and continuing in the Red Rackham's treasure, he and Tintin travel to find a pirate's treasure captured by his ancestor, Sir Francis Haddock, which will eventually transform him into a different character. Now with the newfound wealth and regaining his ancestral home, Mardin Spike Hall, Captain Haddock becomes a socialite, riding a horse, wearing a monocle, and sitting in a theatre box, as we have seen it in the 7 crystal balls. He then evolves to become genuinely heroic, volunteering to sacrifice his life to save Tintin's own life that has become pivotal in Tintin in Tibet. Tintin in Tibet আমরা দেখবো ক্যাপ্টেন হ্যাডক নিজের লাইফ স্যাক্রিফাইস করেও টিনটিনের লাইফকে বাঁচাবার চেষ্টা করছে। So that's the story of the true friendship, true sacrifice. In spite of his being an intoxicated character, in spite of being an uncontrolled figure, Captain Haddock at last even tries to save Tintin by sacrificing his own life while hanging in a cliff, a mountain cliff এর মধ্যে একটা দড়ি দিয়ে টিনটিন এবং ক্যাপ্টেন হ্যাডক ঝুলে আছে। ক্যাপ্টেন হ্যাডক তলায় রয়েছে, টিনটিন ওপরে রয়েছে। ক্যাপ্টেন হ্যাডক বলবে যে আমি দড়িটা কেটে দিই, দিয়ে আমার ভারকে মুক্ত করে তোমাকে বাঁচাই, আমার ওয়েটটা কমে যাওয়ার ফলে তুমি ওপরে উঠতে পারবে। তো আলটিমেটলি সেটা হয়নি। ক্যাপ্টেন লিভস, and in later volumes it appears clearly that he is a retired personality. So you can see here, eod-toed ungulate, a macrocephalic baboon, phylloxera, cannibal. So all these are abusive languages the captain uses, but this is the constant source of humor in Tintin and the Tibet. Introducing with you another very attractive figure, constant companion of Tintin, Snowy. বাংলায় নীরেন্দ্রনাথ চক্রবর্তী যাকে ট্রান্সলেট করেছেন কুট্টুস বলে। So Snowy, known as Milau in Hergé's original version, is a white queer fox terrier dog. He is Tintin's loyal companion, and like Captain Haddock, he is fond of the Loch Lomond brand of the Scotch whiskey. তারও সেটা খেতে খুব ভালো লাগে এবং খেয়ে মাঝে মাঝেই মাতাল হয়ে পড়ে। and Snowy's occasional bouts of drinking tend to get him into trouble, as does his only fear, arachnophobia. So Snowy has also another fear, that is arachnophobia. What is arachnophobia? Fearing the spiders. Spider ke bhoy pawa, makosha ke bhoy pawa. Snowy is modelled in part on a fox terrier dog at a cafe that Hergé used to frequent. Milau, Snowy's original French name, was the nickname of Hergé's first girlfriend. So in the first 8 Tintin adventures, Snowy regularly addressed his internal monologue to the reader, but later on Hergé diminished Snowy's speaking role after the introduction of the Captain Haddock. যেটা Captain Haddock করতো সেটা একসময় Snowy করতো, but with the introduction of Captain Haddock, Snowy's internal monologue, his constant dialogue with the reader, his constant dialogue with himself, একটা বন্ধ হয়ে যায়. From the 9th story, the crab with the golden claws. This is the comic representation of Snowy, and this is Snowy as he appears in Steven Spielberg's 2001 canonical movie. তোমাদেরকে বারবার রেকমেন্ড করছি, হয়তো আমি ওখানটা দেখাবার চেষ্টা করব, The Adventures of Tintin, The Secret of the Unicorn. Moving into another important character, Professor Cuthbert Calculus. Professor Cuthbert Calculus is Tintin's friend. He is basically an absent-minded professor and physicist, and half-deaf physicist, who invents many sophisticated devices used in the series, such as one-person shark-shaped submarine, the moon rocket, and an ultrasound weapon, which will be a kind of bone of contention for the fight between the Borduria and the Silvaduria. So this ultrasound weapon invented by Professor Cuthbert Calculus will eventually become a great conflicting point for these two countries. So Calculus's deafness is a frequent source of humor throughout the entire comic narrative, and as he repeats back what he thinks he was hard, usually in the most unlikely words possible, he does not admit to being near deaf and insists he is only a little hard of hearing in one ear. So Calculus first appeared in Red Rackham's Treasure, more specifically in the newspaper pre-publication of 4th to 5th of March 1943, and was the result of Hergé's long quest to find the archetypal mad scientist or the absent-minded professor. So although Hergé had included characters with similar traits in earlier stories, Calculus developed into a much more complex figure as the series progressed. So he is not only a half-deaf physicist, but he becomes a very important device for Hergé to introduce many political narratives inside this comic fiction. Karon he was a scientist, এবং তার বিভিন্ন সায়েন্টিস্টিক ইনভেনশন যেগুলো তিনি তৈরি করেছেন, সেগুলোকে নিয়ে বিভিন্ন দেশের মধ্যে যে লড়াই হচ্ছে, সেটা আমরা বারবার এই টিনটিন কমিক্সে দেখতে পাচ্ছি. So here are other some prominent figures. Here is Nestor, here is Rastapopoulos, a great villain, and here is Cuthbert Calculus's friend, and he is General Alcazar, Tintin's friend, then I become General. Thompson and Thompson, Team Snowy, Captain Haddock, they are two investigators, rather dumbfounded, stupid investigators, and he is an insurance agent. So and she is of course a very important figure in Tintin, and her name is, I forgot the name, sorry, extremely sorry, and her name is Bianca Castafiore. Her name was Bianca Castafiore, a famous Bianca Castafiore, a famous opera singer. So these are some of the prominent Tintin figures and Tintin characters. Now let us begin Tintin in Tibet. Talking about the Tintin in Tibet, I must tell you that it is the 20th volume of the Adventures of Tintin, the comic series created by the Belgian cartoonist Hergé, and I have already told you that there are 24 comic albums, complete comic albums of Tintin, and this particular Tintin in Tibet was serialized weekly from September 1958 to 1959 in the Tintin magazine, created by Hergé and later published as a book in the book form in 1960. So Tintin in Tibet, published in 1960, first published in the magazine form from 1958 to 1959. Remember, Tintin in Tibet is a detailed text in your syllabus. So remember about these dates we got, because you can be asked questions regarding these dates in your final year examination, in your final semester examination. So Hergé considered it his favorite Tintin adventure. It was Hergé's favorite Tintin adventure, and it's basically an emotional effort on the part of the Hergé, because as he created it while suffering from the traumatic nightmares and a personal conflict while deciding to leave his wife of 3 decades for a younger woman. So this story tells of the younger reporter Tintin in search of his friend Chang Chong-Chen, who the authorities claim has died in a plane crash in the Himalayas. So basically this is a story of tremendous friendship of Chang Chong-Chen, who the authorities claim has died in a plane crash in the Himalayas. And convinced that Chang has survived and accompanied only by snowy Captain Haddock and the Sherpa guide Hergé, Tintin crosses the Himalayas to the plateau of the Tibet, along the way encountering the mysterious Yeti. We don't know who Yeti is. He is or she is an imaginary animal. Many calls him an abominable snowman, almost like a large monkey. Yeti is an imaginary figure. It is a creature of the imagination, thousands years of imagination in the mind of the people who resides in Tibet, in the Himalayan plateau of the Tibet. But in this particular narrative in Tintin in Tibet, Hergé actually presents us with a concretized visual imagery of Yeti ke khane physically, visually Hergé hajir korechen amader samne, and he is not at all an abominable snowman, rather becomes an icon of friendship. আমরা সেটা পরবর্তীকালে দেখব যে কিভাবে ইয়েতিও একটা অদ্ভুত সাইকোলজিক্যাল এক্সটেনশন অফ দ্য মাইন্ড অফ দ্য টিনটিন হয়ে উঠছে এই পার্টিকুলার টেক্সটে, or the psychological extension in the mind of Hergé হয়ে উঠছে এই পার্টিকুলার টেক্সটে. So this particular text is different from the other Tintin texts, because in other Tintin texts we can find some great villains like Rastapopoulos. Some very powerful political conspiracy is involved in other Tintin graphic comic albums. But in this particular text we can see only large white expanses, চারিদিকে সাদা এবং সাদা, এবং শুধু এরকম মানে স্নো নিয়ে, হিমালয় ল্যান্ডস্কেপ নিয়ে পাতার পর পাতা, প্রায় more than half of the novel is located in Himalaya. সেটা পাতার পর পাতা ইনভেস্ট করে যাওয়া, লিখে যাওয়া কিন্তু খুব শক্ত, কারণ গ্রাফিক নভেল ইজ হ্যাভ টু বি ভিজুয়ালি অ্যাট্রাক্টিভ। সেখানে হোয়াইট কালার নিয়ে কনস্ট্যান্ট এক্সপেরিমেন্টেশন করে যাওয়া কিন্তু খুবই ডিফিকাল্ট। এবং তিনটিন ইন টিবেটে কিন্তু আমরা এটা দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে পাতার পর পাতা সাদা নিয়ে কিভাবে লেখক এক্সপেরিমেন্টেশন করে গেছেন। If you look into the cover of Tintin in Tibet, this is the cover of Tintin in Tibet, you can clearly find the footprints of the Yeti and large white expanses of the Himalaya, and you can find, of course, a large symbol of the Tibetan world through a red circle, and in the red circle, in a completely Japanese style, Tintin in Tibet is written. So this is the story of a friendship where Chang Chong-Chen, another very famous character from the Blue Lotus, Bangla Nilkamal, যার কথা আমি already বলেছি, where the writer depicted about the political insurgencies of the Far East, about the Japan and the China. It's basically a text about the Japanese invasion into the Manchuria. So সেই টেক্সটের চ্যাং চং চেন এখন একটা বড় হয়ে গেছে, সে টিনটিনের সঙ্গে দেখা করতে আসছে ইউরোপে, এবং সেই সময় একটা প্লেন ক্র্যাশ হবে এবং সেখানে চ্যাং মারা যাবে। তাই নিয়ে মারা যাবে বলে সন্দেহ করবে, সবাই বলবে যে মারা যাবে তাই, এবং চ্যাং এর খোঁজে টিনটিন বেরিয়ে পড়বে। এই টিবেটের পটভূমিতে। এই কনটেক্সটে, এই পার্টিকুলার ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডে Tintin in Tibet is located from 1958 to 59, published in 1960. And this is a story of a friendship, not only in one level, not only between Tintin and Chang, but also the multi-dimensional tale of friendship, because it also shows Captain's tremendous commitment to Tintin, as well as Tharke, another Sherpa guide, who stayed with them in spite of the fact that every other Sherpas actually left them. So this is a very interesting story, different from other Tintin narratives. Now I will give you a background reading that how Tintin in Tibet is different from the other narratives. I will of course read with you the entire text of Tintin in Tibet, but before that let me give you some introductory words about Tintin in Tibet. Now, following the raid she sharks in 1958 and its large number of characters, Tintin in Tibet differs from other stories in the series in that sense that it features only a few familiar characters and is also Hergé's only adventure not to pit Tintin against an antagonist. So this is the only adventure where Hergé is not pitting Tintin against any form of antagonist. So themes in Hergé's story include extrasensory perception for the first time, perceptions beyond your sensory organs, beyond your sensory organs to feel and perceive. তোমার যে পঞ্চ ইন্দ্রিয় তার বাইরেও যে কিছু একটা ষষ্ঠ ইন্দ্রিয়, সিক্স সেন্স থাকে, একটা যে extrasensory perception থাকে, তার কথা কিন্তু Hergé এই স্টোরিতে বলেছেন। The mysticism of Tibetan Buddhism and friendship. Translated into 32 languages, Tintin in Tibet was widely acclaimed by critics and is generally considered to be Hergé's finest work. It has also been praised by the Dalai Lama, who awarded it the Light of Truth Award. The story was a commercial success and was published in book form by Casterman shortly after its conclusion. The series itself became a defining part of the Franco-Belgian comics tradition. So Dalai Lama, who then received the Nobel Peace Prize, he awarded it the Light of Truth Award because for the first time it's a graphic novel about Tibet. And remember that this is the highest selling books on Tibet. So this is a famous panel from Tintin in Tibet depicting the plane wreckage where Chang is supposed to be dead in this plane crash or plane wreckage. So when Air India objected to having their plane pictured in a crash, Hergé actually changed the logo of the Air India to the fictional Sari Airways. It's completely a fictional airways. The airways is not there in the world, but Hergé actually created it through his own imagination. Now moving into the background ideas of the comic album, that why Hergé created this comic album. But remember that in October 1957, Hergé sent his publisher Casterman the cover of his completed 19th Tintin adventure, The Raid She Sharks, and for several weeks considered plot ideas for his next story. So একটা গ্রাফিক নভেলের আইডিয়া কনসেপ্ট করার পরে সেটাকে আঁকা এঁকে পাঠিয়ে দেওয়ার পরে Casterman was the publisher of Tintin, just like Anando is the publisher of Tintin in Bengali. In the same way, Casterman was the original French publisher of Tintin. Remember Casterman. Fondly recalling the scouting days of his youth, his first idea was to send Tintin back to the United States, as in the third adventure. Tintin in America, to help a group of Native Americans defend their land from the large corporation that wished to drill for oil. On reflection, Hergé came to believe that retracting old ground would be a step backwards. So Hergé began thinking about new ideas. এবং অনেক ধরনের আইডিয়া Hergéর মাথায় আসে। So the first idea was about locating Tintin again in America. The second, another idea had Tintin striving to prove that Haddock's butler, as I've already introduced you, Nestor was butler of Captain Haddock, a helping hand of Haddock. Nestor was framed for a crime committed by his old employers, the Bard brothers. So Nestor is being involved in a conspiracy, in a crime mystery, and Tintin is trying to resolve that crime mystery, solve that crime mystery. So he also dismissed this idea as well, but kept the idea for an adventure with no guns or violence. So from the very beginning, you can understand this is going to be a completely different Tintin adventure, a Tintin adventure with no guns or violence. The only Tintin story without an antagonist. And a third idea sent Tintin and Professor Calculus to a snow-covered polar region where a stranded group of explorers need Calculus to save them from food poisoning. So this is another story that Professor Cuthbert Calculus will eventually rescue these explorers from food poisoning. But he also abandoned this plot also, but kept the setting in a snowy environment and decided to focus not on the Calculus but on the main character, Tintin. So this is a Drigang monastery on the Himalayas of Tibet, similar to the Buddhist monastery depicted in the book. Later, a collaborator of Hergé, remember on that time, Tintin studio, Hergé studio has already been formed, and Tintin was actually a teamwork created by many professional artists. Other professional artists actually tries to help Hergé. So collaborator of Hergé, Jacques van Melkedeke, had suggested in 1954 to set a story in Tibet, likely influenced by the play he adapted for Hergé in the 1940s, Mr. M. Bullock, Mr. Bullock's Disappearance. বলে একটা নাটক হয়েছিল 1940-এ, Jacques van Melkedeke, a collaborator of Hergé, he said this story, he actually advised Hergé to set this story in Tibet. And by 1958, Hergé decided that Tibet would be the setting of the Tintin's next adventure. So after much thinking, Hergé decided that Tintin should be located in the Himalayan plateau of the Tibet, a serene and peaceful landscape. So initial ideas was for the title where the bear snout. He thought about the title bear's snout because many people considered Yeti to be a bear, and the yak snout because yak is very much available in the plateau of the Himalaya, all of which refer to the mountain in the latter part of the story. Although it was initially claimed that market research chose the title Tintin in Tibet, suggesting sales would be better if the book used Tintin's name in the title, entertainment producer and author Harry Thompson suggested the title reflected the solo nature of Tintin's undertaking. So market research proved that Tintin in Tibet would be a very good title, and hence at last Hergé decided to title his adventure story Tintin in Tibet. In the next lecture, I will discuss about how Tintin's narrative becomes a very deep personal story. How from a very deep personal nightmare Hergé created this particular story. I will discuss it in the next lecture. Till then, goodbye. Thank you for your attention.